So what we're going to do today is we'll learn about tables, and I'll give you a basic talk about using tables. They're really important for engineers. Because engineers are working in an environment in which data is highly valued and extremely important. So you really have to learn how to use these tools for showing people data. And that's what tables do. That's exactly what they're designed to do. It's to help people understand the data that you're talking about. It's not a difficult thing to learn how to do, but the tricky thing for you folks is going to be to learn how to do it in such a way that it becomes an effective communication means. And that's sometimes more difficult than you might imagine. So what I'll do is I'll give you the overall view of tables, and then I will give you a little lesson in making them in Word, and then a little lesson in making them in InDesign. So you'll have the skills in either platform. And here we go, setting the table. All right. Okay, so the different parts of this talk, I'll tell you what tables are and are not. I'll tell you the terminology that we use, the parts of a table, a little bit about the theory, the text that you'll need to learn to use with tables, and then some of the conventions. A lot depends upon what kind of style you're using. If you're following APA style, they have a different set of conventions. So what a table is essentially it's a grid, it's an array, it's a matrix. All right? It's got columns, it has rows, and the cells can contain either numbers or words or percentages or just about anything. All right? And that makes it quite different from a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet, which you create in Excel, behind each of those cells there are math formulas. And you can, by simply manipulating the various numbers within the cells, you can apply those formulas and come up with different results. And that's different from a table. A table, there's no manipulation. It's just the numbers. In Word, you have to first create a spreadsheet before you can create a table. All right? Not all versions of Word, but in the one that we've got here at the CAE. A table is not a list. This is a list. That's not a table. There's no grid. You can't see rows and columns. This is something that looks like a table, but it's not. It's a list. All right? It's a list of explaining college rankings, and they've got all of these cute little pieces of clip art over here, and that makes it look like a table, but it's not a table. It's a list. All right? Tables are used in websites. It's one of the favorite tools of website designers. Because of the way HTML works, it's very easy to take different graphics, text, designs, all kinds of design elements, and you can drop them into a table and it'll be neatly organized on the screen. And because of the way HTML works, it doesn't matter how big or small the screen is, it will somehow manage to squeeze the whole thing in. So if you know anything about HTML, there are a whole bunch of different codes that you have to use. You start by using the table instruction, and then table row, table data, table header, column, column group. All right? And so you have to use all of these different tags in HTML to tell HTML what the different things are. But it can create a table for you, and a lot of the websites that you see are actually built around tables. So we'll talk a little bit about the terminology. These are called rows. They go that way. These are called columns. Each one of these is called a cell, and there are borders. Okay? There are rules that surround each one of these. They can be thick, they can be thin. The distance between the border and whatever is filling up the cell, that's called inset or padding. And the cells can have text, they can have graphics, they can have numbers, just about anything. The main use for these things is presenting information, and we use tables most of the time when the audience needs precise numbers. That's what tables are best for, precise numbers. If you want to show trends, you're better off creating a graph. If you want to compare what's happening in one place to another place, you're better off using a column chart or a bar chart or a line graph or something like that. But if your audience needs precise numbers, tables is the way to go. So, some of the terms that we use. First, number one, the outside border. There is a border that runs all the way around the outside of the table. That's called the outside border. Sometimes people make these thicker, sometimes they make them thinner. It's a way of making the table stand out. It becomes the key line. Think of it as the key line around an illustration. All right? And there are some tables where you can leave it off altogether and the table will be just fine. All right, number two, internal borders. That's a decision about that's these lines inside here. Okay? Vertical, horizontal. There are also diagonals, you'll see. As we get into the design of these things, you'll see that you might actually have a diagonal up here with part of it telling you what the column heads are and part of it telling you what the row heads are. Number three is the internal margin. So this tells you the spacing that you've allowed inside of that particular cell. The alignment, you can do this just as you can with any other kind of alignment, right? It can be left, flush right, centered, or justified. And then within the cell, it can be aligned as well, top, middle, or bottom. All right? And then there's a header. This is called the header. And if you have a long table that repeats on several pages, you may want to repeat the header. There's a way of doing that too, so that people don't have to keep flipping back. At the top of each page, if it's a long table, they've got the header repeating. Okay? So the top part is called the box head, and that's really the column head, and it tells you what's in each of the columns. In this particular example, it tells you that there are groups, and the groups are G, M, and C, and then it tells you for each of these groups what the sample size was. And that's part of this table. Now over here, this is the stub heads. So this tells you what layers we're looking at, the layers of G, M, and C, and then it tells you this, and this, and this, and this, and the bottom is the total. And this is where people expect to find the total, at the bottom. So if that's what they expect, that's what you need to give them. All right, and here's a note about this particular table. You notice the note goes on the bottom. It's labeled at the top, table 2, and then intestinal thickness measures in micrometers. All right, so we'll take a look at 3 of these now. Here's a formal table, and you can see it's got all of the cells are surrounded by a line. There's a rule dividing up the different cells. It's got a number of different categories here. So you've got a box head with 2002, 2012, number versus percent. All right, and that's a formal table. Here's an informal table. Okay, this is the sort of thing that works well in presentations. Formal tables usually don't work well in presentations. They're much too detailed. But in this particular case, I could put this up at a staff meeting to talk about staffing for the Alberta project. Okay, it's got, what, half a dozen numbers up there, not too complicated, easy for people to understand. And again, the total is at the bottom. All right? Here's a table. It's a text table. And what I've done here is each of the boxes has text rather than a number in it. So it becomes a decision-making grid, and it allows you to do a comparison. So whenever you have to do some kind of a comparison, think in terms of using a table. It's a really good way to help people see how things compare. So we can go right across here looking at cost. We go from moderate, inexpensive, very expensive, and that one is earn money and become eligible for government funds for college. And then how convenient is it? What kind of living arrangements are made? What happens with your friends? Okay? So it's a very, very simple way, and you see there are really very few numbers used. It's mostly about different situations that would come up. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the theory of these things. And there are a lot of people who've written about tables and what they should be and shouldn't be. I'll take you through 4 of the most important. So the first rule that they give you is the idea of chart junk. And this is the idea that anything that's on a table or in a figure that doesn't add information, you should get rid of. It's chart junk. So having a lot of extra grid lines is chart junk. Having a lot of extra borders is chart junk. Having extra fancy stuff on there that doesn't help you, that's chart junk. This comes from a theory propounded by Professor Tufte of Harvard. And he says get rid of all the extra lines, get rid of any ink that doesn't add information. And that in a table would include the grid lines. If you don't really need them, you can get rid of them. You can de-emphasize them. All right? You can make them thinner, you can make them lighter, and we're back to my favorite idea of taking things and making them gray. That keeps it even simpler. Right? All right. Repeated elements. You don't need to do everything in thousands, millions, billions, trillions. You can get rid of all those extra zeros. Just put a little note that says in thousands of dollars. Solves the problem, and your reader immediately knows what you're talking about. Getting rid of extra dollar signs, anything that's extra, get rid of. So here's an example, believe it or not, from Scientific American. And it is a table, and it is just about as bad as a table can possibly get. All right? Can you get any information out of this thing? I doubt it. Each one of these cones, rods or cones or whatever you want to call them, is supposed to represent child deaths. And this is younger than 5 years per 1,000. I don't know what use that is. I have no idea. The color coding, the background color coding, which actually turns into the borders here, is supposed to be coded according to which part of the world it's from. So this kind of gold color is South America. This blue color here is supposed to be Africa. But it's terrible. It's just awful. Don't do stuff like this. All right? Number 2, table items need to be in some kind of order, and some kind of rational order. All right? If you really have to compare all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, Samoa, Puerto Rico, all right? Alphabetize. I know where to look for Wisconsin. It's going to be somewhere down near the bottom, right? But is there any other reason why Alabama should ever go first for anything? Has Alabama ever done anything in history to deserve to go first? No, I can't think of anything either. All right? So put them in some order that makes sense. Okay? Fastest to slowest. Tallest to shortest. Most expensive to least expensive. Right? Newest to oldest. Closest to furthest. Some order that makes sense. That's going to make it a lot easier for people to take a look. And then you need to have a note at the bottom telling readers how they're sorted. So if you're going from most expensive to least expensive, put a note explaining how these things are ordered. All right? The next is the use of the decimal tab. You have it in Word, you have it in InDesign too. It's a tab that when you type in a number, it will automatically line up things along the decimal point. If there's no decimal point, it will line them up along the units column. Okay? This is a really good thing to use in tables because many times when people look at a table, they want to be able to look down a column, and when they get to the bottom, they'd like to be able to total it. And it's very hard to do that if the numbers are all over the place. So lining things up will work really well. If you can't figure out how to use the decimal tab, then use the right tab. But then you have to make sure that everything is carried either to 2 decimal places or to just the units column, okay? Because if you've got some that have units, that have decimal places and some that don't, you're going to wind up all over the place too. You're going to wind up trying to adjust them by hand, and it's not going to work terribly well. Okay, this is a wonderful total mess. This is exactly the kind of thing that you should try to avoid doing. Anybody have any idea what this is supposed to be telling you? Or well, let's start by figuring out what order do you think these universities are listed in? Can you tell? I should put this on a final exam sometime, right? Yeah, I don't know either. I have no clue. I don't know why they did it this way. All right, data needs to go inside padded cells. Thank you, Sarah. All right, which means you don't want to crowd them, and you need to give them enough white space so that the information can breathe. Now, this is an example. I use this table in my textbook on presentations, and I sent it to the printer, and the graphic designer fixed the table. So I had to send him a note saying, please put it back the way it was. The whole purpose of this was to show people what not to do. But you know already that text should not be crashing into borders, that this is not a good way of displaying data when you do it this way. You want to make sure that there's padding within those cells. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the text that has to go with tables, because there are quite a few different things that you need to know about. All right, so the first is the label. And the default labels I think I showed you in Word, figure, table, and equation, but you can make your own. It's not a big deal. If you want to use Photo 1, Photo 2, Photo 3, or CAD Drawing 1, CAD Drawing 2, you can do that. You can make up your own category. All right? The next is the title. And usually this is fairly short. And if you tell us that it's a table, you don't have to say it's a table, comparing the cost of different designs, because we already know that. So you can keep it very, very, very simple. Keep them fairly straightforward. That's the second part. The third part is the descriptive caption. The EPD 397 instructors have talked about this a lot, and we all feel that we want our students to do this. We want you to put more of a description in than just the simple terminology, calculating distance from the horizon. Because yes, that's exactly what it is, but give us a little more understanding of why this image is here and why it's important. Make your captions more informative, that way you will help your audience. All right, is everybody getting this? Does this make sense? All right, good. All right. Other stuff that goes with it, source. If it's an illustration, that's pretty simple. You tell us where you got it from. And I showed you this when we did captioning illustrations. But when you're doing it with a table, it's the same deal. If you're taking it from something that's a reference, just use the good old-fashioned APA style reference right next to the word table. If you've used the data that came from someplace else, and you're not using a formal style, such as APA, then I think you have an obligation to tell us where you got it and where it showed up. And you'll notice that this does not list a 17-line URL. This actually came from a journal called Rapid Communications in Mass Spectrometry. All right? And this would be a table that was constructed from data that came from the USDA plants database. And how do you get there? You can go there and you'll see the database. So all of this stuff helps you remain credible and keeps you out of academic dishonesty issues. All right? The last kind of text doesn't really have too much to do with tables, but I thought, you know, as long as we're talking about different kinds of text, it's the call-out. And the call-out identifies different parts of an image. You can use it in a diagram like this to integrate the different parts of the brain, but in tables it's not really used that much. So this is what it would look like when you put the whole thing together. At the top we've got the label. It's called a table. It's got a number, and then it's got a title. All right? At the bottom there's a note that explains how the table was created, and here's a credit, tells you where it came from, and there's your table. All right, three conventions that you need to know about. Okay, so the first one, very, very difficult for students to remember. I don't understand. The title of a table goes on the top. The title of a table goes on the top. Where do you put the title of a table? On top, okay. Good, I think 3 times should do it. With most undergrads, 3 times is the magic number. All right? But you can see over here, Table 2, irradiation applications approved or under consideration by the FDA, blah, blah, blah. And then here's our table. Notice that there are no grid lines on this table. All right? They use shading. They use shading to differentiate between the product. And then these things are simply lined up, and it's easy enough because it's just 3 columns. You can find your way. You don't need to have anything terribly fancy. Okay? You number them consecutively, and you number them separately from figures. So the tables are numbered 1 through whatever, and the figures are numbered 1 through forever. So table 2 is followed by table 3, but the figure that follows is not figure 4, it may be figure 6, it may be the 6th figure. And the next table is going to be table 4. Okay? All right. Citing sources, you should have a footnote and a source line. All right? And the APA style is that you separate it with a horizontal rule. You have some kind of a line, and then below that you indicate the source. But if you're not comparing apples to apples, it's really important that you have a note explaining what it is that you are comparing and what that means. All right? In notes below a table, you could put in any assumptions that you made. You can account for inflation. You definitely should tell people in 2014 US dollars. People need to know that. In some parts of the world, inflation is rampant, and if you say something is in 2012 dollars, today it could be 3, 4, 5 times as much. All right? You can, if you do explain the missing zeros, do tell us this is in billions. And then other symbols, you don't have to use numbers. If you use numbers for footnotes and a table, it's going to be confusing. So stick with simple things like an asterisk or a diaeresis. Okay? Now, I just put this up at the end here to show you why PowerPoint is evil. Okay? It is possible in PowerPoint to create a table 75 rows by 75 columns. Yeah. Okay. Just want you to think about that. Questions about this? All right, where are we going to start with Word here? Let's start with Word. Okay. I wish Sarah would come back. Okay. 3 ways to make a table. All right. Number 1, insert, table, and then you drag the cursor to make columns and rows. Insert table, ... and then you spec out the number of columns and rows you want, and then you autofit, or convert the table from text. So I'll show you what this looks like. All right. Insert table, you go under the Insert tab. There's a little picture of a table, and then you simply pull from the top left corner as far over as you need to create the number of rows and columns that you want. And your table will show up, and there you go. Okay? All right. The second way, insert table, insert table. All right, so you go to the Insert tab, go under Table, but instead of doing this thing over here, you go to this thing over here, and here it'll give you a nice little menu, and you can sit and ponder. How many columns? Well, let's see, it's going to be a calendar for the spring semester, and there are, how many days in the week again? I'm going to have to Google that. All right? So then you can decide how many columns and how many rows you need. You can decide auto-fit whether you want it to have a fixed width, whether you want the Word. Now, Word has 2 ways of what they call auto-fitting. All right? Auto-fit to contents means that if you've got one number that's really, really big, and others that are really, really small, it'll make the big column wider in order to accommodate that big fat number. Auto-fit to window means that it will go margin to margin and try to get your table to fit in there. The only problem with clicking on these things is that if later you want to move one of them, you're going to have to go back and change it from auto-fit to some other kind of behavior. So it can get kind of complicated. All right? So you get to pick your rows and your columns. You get to decide whether you want fixed column width, auto-fit to contents, auto-fit to window. And it's your call. You get to decide. Now, to make a table from text, all right, you need to start out with text that's in some kind of format that's usable. And the way Word does this, Word really likes it if you put in something like a tab in between the text. So here I took a list of random people that you may have heard of at some point. and I put tabs between them. I set the tab for the first row, and then as I hit return, each one of these had the same tabs. I type the uniform number, last name, comma, first name, tab, position tab, height tab, weight tab, age tab, experience tab, college tab. Okay, college return. All right, and then by simply going over here, again, under the insert menu, convert text to table, select the whole thing, click convert text to table, it'll give me this thing. This is the part I really hate, is this stupid little thing over here. Table 1 in blue. I don't know why Bill put that there, but it happens every time you make a table. But you should wind up with something that's fairly nice. It'll look like this. You'll have to decide if that's enough cell padding to accomplish what you want it to accomplish. All right? So when you're working in Word, you're going to see a whole bunch of different little things. You should know what they are. This little circle with the points coming out of it in 8 different directions, that's called an end of cell mark. That's the end of cell mark. So you may select the text, you may select the text plus the return, or you may select the entire cell including the cell mark. And it's what you select may make a difference in terms of manipulating things inside Word. Okay? The default is a black half-point, single-line, solid-line border that does print. If you remove the border, you'll see grid lines that form the cell. But the grid lines are not printed. You'll just see a little thin blue line that'll show up. Okay? There is a ribbon. You can get table tools up there. Okay? So when you're working in a table, you have 2 buttons, layout and design. So this one out here, this one is called design. This is the design tab. And this lets you do things like banded rows. So a banded row means one row will be gray, the next row will be clear. The next row will be gray, the next row will be clear. It's a way of distinguishing between rows. If you do that, you can get rid of the grid lines. You don't need to have them because the different shadings will indicate what's where. You can do the same thing with banded columns also. If you tell Word that you have a header row, okay, if you click this box, Word will assume that the top row across is your header row, and that if you want the header to repeat on different new pages, it can do that. If you don't click that thing, Word won't know what you're talking about. It won't have a clue. So you want to make sure that you click that thing. Other stuff that I can show you here, there are different, this is where you create the borders. The one that's solid is the one that you're going to change when you click on this thing. So this is the bottom border. That's solid. If I make it thicker, if I take it up to 2 points or something like that, and then click on it, it'll make the border thicker. All right? The other tab, the layout tab, will give you this stuff. This allows you to add extra rows and columns if you need to. It allows you to merge cells. If you do merge cells, if you decide that let's say you've got 6 columns, but you just want to have one header right across the top, you can merge those 6 cells. It may be very hard to go back if you decide you don't like the way it looks. So it's okay to use that, but just make sure that that's what you really, really want to do. This will give you all the auto-fitting settings that I showed you before. Auto-fit to the window, auto-fit to content. This allows you to adjust the height of the rows and the width of the columns. If you want them to be standardized, you can do that. This will give you the alignments within the cell. So if you want all of your text to be centered right in the middle of the cell, you go over here. Okay? But if you're using a decimal, then you probably want to have one of these left alignments with a tab that leads you into the decimal point. That's what you're trying to do. This is, okay, this way, I'm going to show you this one first. Text direction. You probably have seen tables where the text goes like this. Okay? You will not make friends if you do that. All right? Have you had to look at a textbook like this? Have you spent an evening studying a textbook with your head like? Yeah. So you know that, yes, you can get more text in, but boy, you're asking a lot from your audience when you do that. So you can play with it, but be careful. Cell margins, this allows you to have more inset within each cell block. So you have, this is where you create the padded cells. This is a truly cool tool. I know it says that it's under table tools, but being able to sort is one of the best things that you can do in Word. You can select any kind of text at all, and then use that sort tool to have it alphabetized by the computer. Isn't that nice? It doesn't just have to be in a table, but this is a sort tool that's available to you. This is where you click repeat header rows. That's where that is, right up there. Okay. So the design tab, we talked a little bit about that, changing the different borders. Having very thick borders, that might look good, but it also might obscure the information. So when you click on this tool over here, this lets you change all the different borders. This is where the diagonals are that I was telling you about. You can add those if you choose to as well. Okay. More about there's a borders and shading tool that you can pull in. It also allows you to change shading within the boxes, within the cells, change the borders, a whole bunch of different things you can do there. All right. These are the auto fit. We talked about these already. I'm not going to go through that one again. And then adding a row, it says in this version, in your CAE version of Word, that if you hover the mouse near the location where you wish to add a row or column and click the plus sign that appears, a new row or column will appear in the table. You're welcome to try it. I'm not that courageous. Okay? Hovering is not my thing. I'm not big on hovering. Okay? Here's an informal table made with auto format. All right. This is what they call the colorful format. This is the one they call 3D effects format, because you can see it looks like it's got some kind of 3D effect there. I don't know how much use that is. And then there are table properties. If you have the table tools layout menu open over here under cell size, if you click on that little arrow down there, it'll open up all of these, and that will enable you to change the various properties. Okay? The first one is table, and you've got alignment of the table. And then the next one over there, this is the different options that you have. The cell margins is the same as cell padding. Okay? So you can see that if you just let the computer do it, you wind up with something like that. That's a lot easier to read. All right, rows and columns, just to show you what it looks like. And then the vertical alignment. Sometimes it's a good idea to align things vertically and center them within the cell, because this sort of assures you that you'll have padding above and below. But it may not look good. You'll have to decide. If you've got more than one line of text, not so good. All right. And then there's alternative text. All right. And this is something you can type in, and when people mouse over the table, if they've got this turned on their computer, the computer will read to them and tell them that this is you're mousing over a table that shows a comparison of this or that or the other thing. Right? This is what the sort button looks like. It lets you sort by column. It lets you sort by number. It's a great tool. I use this all the time. When I create class lists, I can sort by last name. I can sort by major. I can sort by grades. I can do all kinds of different sorting using that. And that's Word. How am I doing here? Oh, very nice. Okay. And now InDesign. I'll do the presentation instead of the demo. It's easier for me. All right. InDesign. Create tables. You open up a document, and you want to make sure that you have primary text frame. And then there's a menu at the very top that says Table, and you click on Insert Table. And it's going to ask you what kind of table do you want, and there you go. Looks familiar? Very similar to what I showed you in Word. Okay, very much the same thing. Do specify a header row if you want one. And the header row can look different. For example, here I've got the months, and I reverse the type out, and it's got a darker background. It helps me eliminate grid lines. And when you're ready, just click OK, and it'll appear. All right. Headers and footers. you can put something at the top of your table. All right, and you can tell the computer again, repeat the header. You go over here, repeat header on every new page or whatever it is. Or if you've got two columns, here I've got two columns with the same list. The list is continued in the second column, and the header is repeated. So InDesign can do that for you. All right, table options, two ways to get there. You can click on the magic button. You've got, if you open up the panel, if you click table panel, you'll get this table, table style, table cells, and then you'll get the option button there. You can also get it by pulling down the table window and table menu and going to table setup. Either way, or you could remember Alt-Shift-Control-V. And there are guys who do. All right. So this is what the table panel looks like. Again, it gives you this very similar to what you had with Word, right? How many rows do you want? How many columns do you want? You can set that. How big do you want them to be? If you want them to be at least half a pica, you can do that, 3 points. You can set the column width, alignments, vertical alignment, or you can try justified alignment. You let the computer figure out how to align it within the box if you want. How much space on top, how much space below, how much space to the right, to the left, how much space to the right. And if you click on the link, that will automatically do it. And this is where you can change the text direction. So it's all right in one spot for you if you want to use it. All right, and this is what the table options box looks like overall. Okay. This is where you set the borders. Okay, you can set it, it's 1 point, it's solid, it's black, it's 100%. If you want it to be gray, set it at a lower percentage. Right? And if you remove stroke and fill, you can choose view, extra, you pull down the view menu, extras, show frame edges, and that will show you where the cell boundaries are. So if you get rid of the lines, you can still see them. Now, no visible table borders. All right, here you go. View, extras, show frame edges. That's where it's hiding. Okay, and I showed you this already with the different thicknesses, so you don't need that. Alignments, you can align within the cells, the same alignments that I showed you before. The insets. Okay. Now, if you increase the cell inset spacing, that may increase the height of the row, the whole row. The table would be adjusted to fit that. And if the row height is set at a fixed value, make sure you have enough room, otherwise you're going to wind up with overset text. You'll get a message telling you that there's overset text, and you'll go looking for it. Text to table in InDesign, same deal. You start with a table in text form, columns separated by tabs, rows separated by paragraph returns. You select all the text with the cursor, and then you go into the table menu, convert text to table, look for the tabs, look for the paragraph marks, make me a table. And it'll do it. I should go back for just a second. If you've got a lot of tables and you want them all to have the same style, you can create a table style. So let's say all of your tables are going to be in 10-point, Helvetica, bold, or something like that. You can do that. You can create a table style and simply apply that to all the tables. It'll make everything nice and neat. And this is what it looks like, again, much the same as what you saw with Word. Okay, questions about this? Tables are very, very useful. They're really helpful in a lot of different situations. Whenever you're trying to explain to people what the precise numbers are, that's the way to go. And for engineers, you've got to learn how to do this stuff, because everybody's going to expect you to do it. Question?
You ever paste Excel tables into InDesign?
Can you paste an Excel table into InDesign?
You can in like Word, right? Format.
Yeah, but Word and Excel are made by the same company.
Exactly.
So I'll have to look into that. I don't know the answer to that. It may be that you simply select all the cells, copy, and then paste them from the Excel spreadsheet into InDesign.
Right, that's what I was figuring out.
But I'll try it. I'll let you know. If my computer explodes, it's all your fault. Okay. Find somebody in class you don't know very well. You should go with that because you're both sick and you won't make anybody else sick. All right? So your job for the rest of the class period is to interview that person, get some answers to these questions. Go. I'm gonna see what if I can get the answer to that Excel question.
Professor, if there's an odd number of people in class today,
There's an odd number of people because one student went to hear the dean. So, you get an out. Okay.
Why don't you get it?
Huh? Why don't I interview? Okay.